The conquered ring was the most important place in the known galaxy. At least, that was what the 17 species sitting inside it believed. It floated above the gas giant Kithmora like a crown made of glass and metal, and inside its great curved halls, the Galactic Council made decisions that shaped the lives of billions. Wars had been stopped here, borders had been drawn here, entire civilizations had begged at its doors for mercy and walked away with peace instead. Humanity had a seat at the table, a small one, a junior one. Nobody paid much attention to it. Boyoung walked into the council chamber the same way she always did, quietly, without hurry, her dark eyes reading the room before she had taken 3 steps inside. She was the senior human diplomat, and she had held that title for 9 years. In those 9 years, she had learned that the best way to be underestimated was to let people do it freely. She never corrected them. She never raised her voice. She simply watched and waited and remembered everything. The chamber was large enough to hold 500 delegates, but only 200 or so had shown up for the morning session. It was a routine day. Trade routes, border adjustments, the usual. Boyoung took her seat near the back and placed her data tablet on the desk in front of her. She did not look at it. She looked at the other delegates instead. Counselor Veth of the Orin was speaking at the main podium. Veth was tall and thin, with 6 arms that moved slowly when he talked, like the legs of a creature walking through water. His skin gave off a faint blue glow, not bright, just enough to notice. He was talking about shipping rights along the outer lanes, and most of the room was barely listening. Boyoung was listening, not to what he said, to how he moved when he said it. She had noticed something 3 weeks ago. Veth always kept his 4th and 5th arms still when he spoke. It was a subtle thing, a kind of stillness that only appeared when he was choosing his words very carefully. He was doing it now, which meant that what he was saying about shipping routes was not really about shipping routes at all. Boyoung made a small note on her tablet and kept watching. 2 rows ahead of her, the Thrin representative was doing something interesting. The Thrin were large, armored beings who looked like they had been built for war because they had been. Their military history was older than most other species' written language. The Thrin delegate, a senior officer named Dorak, was reviewing a private document on his personal screen. He had tilted the screen slightly so that no one beside him could see it. He had not tilted it far enough. Boyoung could read the first line from where she sat. It was a report about a colony called Reth 4. She had never heard of it. She wrote the name down. After the session ended and the chamber emptied, Boyoung walked to the observation deck on the outer ring and stood at the wide window. Below her, the gas giant Kethmora moved slowly, its silver clouds turning in long, lazy spirals. She liked looking at it. It reminded her that the universe was very old and very large, and that most of what happened inside it had nothing to do with the arguments of small creatures in glass stations. Her tablet chimed. It was Sori, her intelligence officer, sending a short message from the human research section 2 levels below. The message said, "Found something. Come when you can." Boyoung did not run. She never ran. She finished looking at the gas giant, then went downstairs. Sori was sitting at her desk, surrounded by 3 screens, all of them open to different databases. She was a small woman who held herself very still, like someone who had learned early that being quiet made you invisible, and that being invisible was useful. She looked up when Boyoung entered and pointed at the center screen. "I was doing a routine archive review," Sori said, "looking at old contact reports. Things from before first contact, when we were still just a signal in deep space to most of them." She tapped the screen. "I found something strange. 11 of the 17 council species have classified files tied to a single search string. The string is human contact restricted." Boyoung looked at the screen. "How old are the files?" "The newest one is 40 years old. The oldest one is 412 years old." Sori paused. "That one predates official first contact. We were not supposed to have met them yet." The room was quiet for a moment. "Can you open them?" Boyoung asked. "No. They are sealed at a level I cannot reach from here. But I can see that they exist, and I can see their dates, and I can see one other thing." Sori pointed to a small column on the right side of the screen. "Every single file has an emergency access tag, the kind that gets added when a document is considered a threat to public order." Bo-young stood there for a long moment, reading the list of species names next to those files: the Orin, the Thrin, the Queth, the Velthari. 11 names she knew well, 11 civilizations she had sat across from in that great chamber for 9 years. They all had secret files about humanity, files so sensitive they were locked behind emergency tags, files 4 centuries old. She thought about Veth's carefully still arms. She thought about Dorak and the Reth 4 report. She thought about how no one in that chamber ever sat too close to the human delegates. She had always assumed it was simple politics. Humans were new, humans were small. No one wanted to be seen as too friendly with the junior species. But now she wondered if it was something else entirely. "Keep looking," she said to Sori. "Quietly, tell no one." Sori nodded once and turned back to her screens. That same evening, on the other side of the station, a young scientist named Yuna was at a diplomatic reception. These events were dull, but useful. The kind of gathering where people drank warm things out of tall glasses and talked about nothing for 2 hours before going back to their real work. Yuna was not a politician. She was a xenobiologist, which meant she studied alien life, and she found aliens far more interesting in person than in any textbook. She had struck up a conversation with a junior aide from the Quith delegation, a young being whose name translated roughly as fourth voice of the Southern Branch. She called him Foss for short, and he seemed to find this acceptable. They talked about bioluminescent ocean life for a while, which Yuna genuinely loved, and which seemed to relax him. And then, because she was genuinely curious, and not yet aware that the question had a wrong answer, she asked him why so many alien species seemed uncomfortable when a human ship entered a sector. Foss went completely still, not the polite still of someone thinking, the cold still of something caught in the open. He excused himself. He did not come back. The next morning, Yuna found a small data chip sitting on her bunk. She had not put it there. She held it up and turned it over. It was old technology, the kind no one used anymore. She found a reader in a supply drawer and plugged it in. The chip contained one file. The file contained one sentence, written in 17 different languages, one for each council species. She read the human version. It said, "Do not ask that question in public." Yuna sat on the edge of her bunk for a long time, reading that sentence over and over. Then she picked up her communicator and called Bo-young. The outer fringe was not a friendly place. There were no good stars out here, only old ones, dim and cold, hanging in the dark like dying fires. The planets that circled them were dead rocks, cracked and airless, or swollen gas giants with no moons worth landing on. There were no major trade lanes, no council stations, no one to call if something went wrong. Most species avoided the fringe entirely. They had good reasons. Admiral Do-hyun had been stationed here for 6 weeks. He stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the starfield through the main viewport. He did not find the fringe threatening. He found it honest. Out here there was nothing pretending to be something it was not. There was just space and silence, and the cold truth of distance. Sergeant Taiho appeared at his shoulder, a cup of hot tea in each hand. He held one out. Do-hyun took it without looking away from the viewport. "We picked up 2 Thrin signals about 4 hours behind us," Taiho said. His voice was easy, the way it always was. Relaxed on the surface, watching everything underneath. Moving on a matching heading, not transmitting. "I know," Do-hyun said. Taiho glanced at him. "You knew before I told you." "I knew before they left their port." Do-hyun sipped his tea. "Tell Kangmin to prepare the engines for a quiet hold. I want us stopped and dark at the pale table by the time they catch up." Taiho looked at him for a second longer than usual. Then he nodded and went to find Kangmin. 3 days earlier, back on the conquered ring, Bo-young had been granted something rare, an audience with the Queth elder known as the Witness. The Queth were ancient beings, not just old in the way that long-lived creatures were old, but old in the way that made other species feel like children. They had been watching the galaxy for longer than most civilizations had existed. The Witness, it was said, had been present at more historical events than any living being in council records. Getting an audience with it was not easy. Bo-young had been requesting one for 7 months. The meeting room was dim and smelled of something old and dry, like the inside of a library that had not been opened in a long time. The Witness was hard to look at directly, not because it was frightening, but because it kept changing at the edges, its form was not entirely solid. It moved like smoke that had decided to be a shape. Bo-young sat down. She did not speak. She had learned that with very old beings, patience was the only currency that worked. The witness was quiet for several minutes. Then it said, in a voice that sounded like the slow movement of deep water, "You want to know about the Veth corridor?" Bo-young did not ask how it knew. "Yes," she said. "The Veth corridor does not appear on Queth star charts anymore," the witness said. "We renamed it after the event. We do not use the old name. We do not talk about what happened there." It was quiet again. "But you will keep asking, and you will find pieces of the truth in other places, and the pieces will be incomplete and dangerous. So I will tell you what I tell no one," it told her. 50 years ago, 3 Queth warships had cornered a single human exploration vessel in that region of space. The humans had found something that the Queth considered private, a relic of their early history that they did not want examined by young species. The Queth commanders had decided to make sure the humans did not leave with that knowledge. 12,000 Queth crew across 3 capital ships against 1 human vessel with a crew of 40. The witness paused for a long time after that. "What remained?" Bo-young asked quietly. "The humans left," it said. "All 40 of them. They took the relic with them. They filed no complaint, made no report, said nothing to anyone." Another pause. "We do not speak of what we lost. We have not spoken of it in 50 years. I am speaking of it now because I think you need to understand something important." A diplomat. The shape that was the witness leaned closer. The humans who did that were not soldiers. They were not a military crew. They were scientists and explorers on a ship with no weapons. Bo-young kept her face still. She thanked the witness and left. In the human research section, Sori and Kongmin's old colleague had been at work all night. The data cache Tai-Ho's team had retrieved from the abandoned Orin station in the Fringe had taken Sori 16 hours to crack. What she found inside was not a weapons file or a military record. It was a study, a scientific study written in careful Orin script 40 years long. A team of Orin researchers had spent 4 decades following human ships and crews without their knowledge, studying them from a distance, reviewing recordings, analyzing patterns. The study was thorough and detailed, and written with the careful calm of scientists who were trying very hard not to show that what they had found was frightening them. Sori read the conclusion 3 times to make sure she understood it. It said, "Human beings do not fight like predators. They do not fight like prey animals defending territory. They fight like something that has made a quiet, total decision that failure is not possible. Other species have limits, biological, psychological, social, that eventually override their will to continue. In every encounter studied, humans showed no evidence of reaching that limit. The study recommended that the document be sealed and that no further formal contact between Orin researchers and human military units be conducted. It was sealed the same day." Sori sent the summary to Bo-young with a single line attached. "There are 10 more files like this. Different species, same conclusion." Bo-young read it on her way to the council chamber, where Dorak was pushing through an emergency motion. The motion required all human fleet movements in the outer fringe to be reported to a joint monitoring body, effective immediately. It was framed as a safety measure. It passed 14 votes to 3. Bo-young voted against it without expression and walked out of the chamber without speaking to anyone. In the corridor outside, a young Thrin aide fell into step beside her. He spoke without looking at her, his voice low. He said that Dorak had also authorized 2 Thrin warships to follow Do-hyun's fleet. They had already departed. He said nothing else and walked away. Bo-young stopped walking. She stood in the corridor for exactly 4 seconds. Then she took out her communicator and typed one word to Do-hyun. "Soon." She sent it and kept walking. On the bridge of his flagship, deep in the outer fringe, Do-hyun felt the message arrive. He read it. He set the communicator down. He looked at the starfield for a moment, then turned to Tai-ho. "How long until the Thrin ships are in range?" he asked. Tai-ho checked his display. 4 hours, maybe a little less. Do-hyun nodded slowly. "Tell Kongmin to prepare the welcome," he said. Tai-ho opened his mouth. He closed it. He had served with Do-hyun for 11 years, and he had learned that asking follow-up questions about statements like that rarely made him feel better. He went to find Kangmin. Behind him, Do-hyun finished his tea and watched the cold stars of the fringe pass slowly by. He had been expecting this moment for some time. He was not worried about it. He was only thinking about how to make sure, when it was over, that both sides walked away with a clear understanding. Some lessons, he believed, were better taught without anyone getting hurt. The place humans called the Pale Table was not a comfortable region of space. A flat nebula spread across it in long, thin sheets, pale yellow and gray, like old paper held up to a dim light. It was beautiful in the way that empty places sometimes were, but it offered nothing useful. No cover, no debris fields, no moons to hide behind. Anyone who entered the Pale Table could be seen from a very long distance in every direction. The Thrinn had chosen it for exactly that reason. They wanted Do-hyun's fleet visible. They wanted the humans to know they were surrounded. Near to feel the weight of two full Thrinn warship groups closing in from separate angles. It was a message, not an attack. A demonstration of control. The Thrinn were good at those. What they found when they dropped out of faster-than-light travel was not what they expected. Do-hyun's fleet was already there. All 7 ships holding position in a clean diamond formation at the exact geometric center of the Pale Table. Every ship was dark. No running lights, minimal engine output, sensors on passive. They were not hiding. They had clearly been there for some time, waiting in the silence like something patient and unbothered. The Thrinn admiral, whose name translated to roughly the equivalent of a military rank and title, that meant the one who ends disputes, looked at the formation on his display and felt the first small, cold touch of unease. He opened a communication channel. "Human fleet, you are in an area designated for joint monitoring. Identify your purpose." There was a short pause. Then Do-hyun's voice came back, calm and unhurried. "You followed us here. We thought you might want a closer look." The Thrinn admiral stared at his display. He had not expected that. He had expected either a defensive response or a retreat. He had not expected the humans to simply acknowledge the pursuit and invite him forward. He did not know what to do with that. What followed over the next 3 hours was not a battle. No weapons fired, no shields raised, no threats given or received. What happened instead was something far more unsettling. Do-hyun's fleet began to move. Not quickly and not aggressively. They shifted position slowly, one ship at a time. In a series of calm adjustments that seemed almost casual, but every time a Thrinn ship changed course, testing angles, trying to find a position of advantage, a human ship had already moved to answer it, not reacting, answering, as if they had already known what was coming. The Thrinn admiral tried a standard flanking approach that his academy had taught him was impossible to counter without advance warning. 2 human ships were already holding the exact positions that blocked it. He tried a dispersal pattern used only in classified Thrinn military exercises. The human formation adapted around it like water moving around stones. After 90 minutes, one of the Thrinn officers said quietly, "Admiral, they are not responding to us. They predicted us." The admiral said nothing. He was watching the human ships move through another maneuver, and he was thinking about how long they must have been tracking his fleet. Not just from the edge of the Pale Table, but from the moment his ships had left their last station. He thought about the course his fleet had taken, all the small adjustments made for efficiency, all the timing decisions that only his senior officers had known. He thought about how the human formation at this moment was sitting in precisely the locations that would give them complete tactical dominance in the event of an actual engagement. They had not arrived here by chance. They had placed themselves exactly where they needed to be before the Thrinn had even entered the system. He closed the communication channel and sat with that thought for a long time. On the bridge of the human flagship, Tae-ho watched the Thrinn ships and ate a nutrition bar. He chewed slowly. "Do you think they understand yet?" he asked. "Almost," Do-hyun said. Tae-ho nodded and kept chewing. Below decks, Sori was working. She had been running analysis for 48 hours, cross-referencing the sealed archives, the Oren study, the witness testimony, and a dozen older contact reports that most people had dismissed as minor incidents. She kept finding the same pattern buried inside different events, different centuries, different species. She called Do-hyun down when she was sure. Look at this, she said, pulling up a timeline on her screen. She had marked 17 separate incidents across 300 years. Human crews, exploration ships, trade vessels, one early military escort caught in situations where they were outnumbered, out-equipped, and in most cases had no reason to believe they could survive. In every single case, Story said, they lost the opening phase. The first exchange went badly, sometimes very badly. She pointed at the early incidents. This one, humans lost 4 ships in the first 10 minutes. This one, the crew was reduced by 30% before they had a chance to respond. Do-hyun looked at the timeline without expression. But they all won, Story said. Every single one. Not because they had better weapons or more ships, because of what happened after the opening. She highlighted a section in each incident. The middle phase, after the first losses. They changed, not their tactics, not their technology. Something in how they process the situation. Every other species, when they start losing, shows measurable decline, slower decisions. Reduced coordination, eventually withdrawal. Humans did not show that. The worse it got, the more focused they became. She looked at him. I have not found a single case where a human group, outnumbered and losing, chose to stop. Do-hyun was quiet. There is one more thing, Story said. The Oren study noted it, but I think they missed how important it is. Every species they studied has a point where survival instinct overrides mission, where the body or the mind says the cost is too high and forces a retreat. It is biological. It is universal. She paused. They could not find that point in human subjects, not in any data they reviewed. They assumed it existed and simply had not been reached yet. I am not sure they were right. Outside, the Thryn fleet was beginning to pull back. Slowly, quietly, no announcement. One ship, then another, adjusting course away from the pale table. On the Concord ring, far from the cold stars of the fringe, Bo-young sat across from Counselor Vaith in a small private room that was not officially used for council business. Veth had finally agreed to meet her. She had laid out everything. The sealed files, the witness testimony, Sori's analysis, the Thryn's surveillance of Do-hyun's fleet. She had not accused anyone. She had simply presented what she knew in the careful, unhurried way she presented everything. Veth sat very still when she finished. His fourth and fifth arms were completely motionless. You want to know why? He said. I want to understand, she said, before someone makes a mistake that cannot be undone. Veth was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that meant something heavy was being moved. Then he said, It is not what you are that concerns the council. You are small, you are new, you are not especially powerful by galactic standards. He looked at her directly. It is what you will become. We have seen species rise before. We have models. Every species, when it grows strong enough, eventually acts in its own interest at the cost of others. That is how power works. That is what power does. His glow dimmed slightly. But our models do not account for you. We cannot predict what humans will do when you are truly strong. We cannot find the ceiling. And what we cannot predict, we fear. Bo-young looked at him for a moment. You have been afraid of a ceiling you cannot see, she said. Has it occurred to you to ask what we might do with strength, rather than what we might do to others with it? Veth did not answer, but his arms moved, all 6 of them, in a way she had never seen before. Back in the pale table, the last Thryn ship completed its turn and began moving away. No shots had been fired. The encounter would be logged as a navigational exercise. Taiho finished his nutrition bar and crumpled the wrapper. Do-hyun turned from the viewport. Get some rest, he said. Both of you. Taeho looked at Sori. Sori looked at Taiho. Neither of them moved. I said rest, Do-hyun said, and there was the faint edge of something that might have been warmth in his voice. He turned back to the stars. We are going to need it. The coordinates on the data chip led to a system with no name, no sun, no living planets, nothing in the official charts. Just an empty point in space that appeared as blank as anything else in the dark, unless you looked very carefully in the right frequency, at exactly the right angle. Then you could see it. A station, or what had been a station, orbiting nothing. Old enough that its outer hull had gone the same gray-black as the rock it resembled. It had been hiding in plain sight for a very long time. Yuna took a small crew. Taiho insisted on coming, which meant his 4 best people came too. Kangmin came because no one had told him not to, and because old unknown structures had engineering that interested him the way good food interested other people. They docked without difficulty. The station let them in, which was the first strange thing. It had no power, but the airlock still worked, and the interior still held breathable air. Thin and old and cold, but breathable. Someone had built this to last. They moved through dark corridors with handheld lights. Taiho walked point with the same loose, easy caution he brought to every unknown space. Relaxed until the moment he wasn't, which was a threshold only he could feel. Yuna stayed behind him and looked at everything. The archive room was in the center of the station. The door was not locked. Inside were rows of data pillars, each one taller than a person, each one storing information in a format that turned out to be readable by the translation software on Yuna's tablet. She had not expected that. She touched the nearest pillar and waited while the software worked. Then she started reading, and she did not speak for a very long time. The archive belonged to no single species. It had contributions from dozens of civilizations, some of them still active members of the Galactic Council, some of them species that no one alive had ever met. Many of the species recorded here were extinct. Their records existed only in this station, circling nothing, waiting. What the archive contained was not a history of wars. It was a history of choices. 31 separate civilizations across 31 centuries had encountered humanity before official first contact, through radio signals, recovered probes, drift artifacts, brief accidental sightings. In every case, the species involved had made the same decision: observe, wait, and do not interfere. Most of them had kept this decision secret. Most of them had been afraid. And then most of them had been destroyed, not by humans, but by the ordinary catastrophes of the galaxy. Stellar events, plagues, internal collapses, the slow, grinding end that came for civilizations that ran out of time or luck or will. Reading their final records was a strange experience. Some of them had been watching humanity grow through telescopes while they themselves were dying, and the notes they left behind had the quality of regret that people only wrote when they knew they were writing their last words. The final entry in the archive belonged to a species called the Veth Ori. They had gone silent 800 years ago. Their last note was short. Yuna read it 3 times. It said, in essence, that they had spent 1,000 years being afraid of humanity, afraid of what humans might do when they grew powerful, and that this fear had cost them something they could never measure. Because the threats that had eventually ended them were not human, and humans, had they been asked, might have helped. Taiho read over her shoulder. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "That is a rough thing to leave behind." "Yes," Yuna said. She kept looking. There was one more record tucked in the final pillar, badly damaged. It was a visual log. The footage was corrupted, full of noise, but fragments were visible. It showed a human ship, old design, early Starflight era, responding to a distress signal from a Veth Ori colony world. It showed humans unloading supply containers, setting up medical stations in the rubble of collapsed buildings, working in the dirt and the dust alongside Veth Ori survivors. The recording flickered in and out. In one clear fragment, a human woman in a dusty jacket was helping an injured Veth Ori stand up. She was not a soldier. She was not a diplomat. She was just someone who had come because a signal said help was needed. The recording ended. The Veth Ori colony, according to the archive notes, had not survived, but the Veth Ori survivors from that world had. 22 of them, brought to safety by the crew of one human ship that had received a signal and turned around. Yuna stood in the dark of the archive room for a long time after that. Kangmin was sitting on the floor a few meters away, doing something with his tablet that was probably not related to the mission. Taiho was at the door, watching the corridor. The station hummed faintly around them, some residual system still running after 8 centuries, keeping the air breathable, keeping the records safe. Back on the Conquered Ring, the situation had broken open. Sori had intercepted an encoded Thryn communication. It had taken her less than 3 hours to break the encryption, which was either a sign of her skill or a sign that the Thryn had not expected anyone to be listening that carefully. Probably both. She read the contents. Then she read them again. Then she sent them to Boyong with a note that said only, "Read this immediately." Boyong read it. It described something the Council had been keeping secret for 3 weeks. 2 outposts on the border of mapped space. One Orin, one Thrin had gone silent, not attacked in any way that matched known patterns. Simply gone. The reports had been suppressed. The council had been meeting in closed session to discuss a response. The response they had agreed on, quietly and without public vote, was to designate 3 border territories as a buffer zone, regions to be abandoned if the unknown force advanced. The logic was cold and practical. Sacrifice the least connected territories to buy time for the core worlds. One of those territories contained a human colony, 40,000 people. The council had not told them. The council had not told anyone. Boyoung did not raise her voice. She never did. She walked into the closed council session without waiting to be called. She connected her tablet to the chamber display and showed every delegate in the room the suppressed outpost reports. She showed the decision to use human territory as a buffer. She showed the timeline of when the council had known and what they had chosen not to say. The chamber was loud for several minutes. Then it was quiet. In the quiet, Boyoung stood at the center of the floor and waited. When the last voice fell silent, she looked at Veth, then at Dorak, then at each of the other delegates in turn. Humanity would like to propose a different plan, she said. On the bridge of his flagship, Do-hyun received Sori's data before Boyoung had even walked into the chamber. He had already given the order. The fleet was moving, not toward the conquered ring, toward the last known position of the destroyed outposts near the border where the maps ended and the dark began. Tai-ho, reached by communicator from the archive station, asked what was happening. Do-hyun told him. Tai-ho was quiet for a moment. "Are you worried?" he asked. Do-hyun thought about it. The question deserved honesty. "No," he said. "That is completely insane," Tai-ho said. Probably Do-hyun said. "Come back to the fleet. Bring Yuna. We will need her." Yuna, still standing in the archive room, heard the order over the communicator. She looked at the damaged visual log one more time, the human woman in the dusty jacket, helping a stranger stand up in the rubble of a dying world. Then she called Do-hyun back. "I found something here," she said. "Something important. I'll tell you on the way." "Good," Do-hyun said, and there was something in his voice. Not worry and not excitement, but the steady readiness of someone who had been waiting for the next thing and was now simply ready to meet it. Part 5. The border of mapped space was called the Veil, not because anything covered it, because something about the region made instruments uncertain, made signals drift, made the edge of the known galaxy feel like the edge of a table you were about to fall off. Do-hyun's fleet arrived first. 3 other human fleets joined them within 6 hours, answering a request that Do-hyun had sent quietly and without going through council channels. The council military forces were still in the process of deciding who had authority over the response. Humanity had already shown up. Tai-ho stood at the sensor display and looked at what was coming. "That is a lot of them," he said. "Yes," Do-hyun said. It was not a fleet, not an army in any sense that matched what was in the tactical databases. It was a wave, thousands of entities moving together in dense formation, pushing in from beyond the veil in a front that stretched across more space than any single fleet could cover. They did not communicate. They had not responded to any signal. They did not slow down. They simply came, and everything in their path was gone when they passed. The first council warship to engage was destroyed in 6 seconds. It did not have time to complete a full weapons cycle. The council commander on the secondary channel began giving a retreat order and then stopped mid-sentence. Static. Do-hyun opened a channel to all council forces. His voice was the same as it was when he ordered tea. "Pull back behind our formation. Let us work." There was a long pause from the council side. Then slowly, the non-human ships began to move backward. What came next was 3 days long. It was not a beautiful battle. There was nothing clean or fast about it. It was the kind of fighting that ground people down. Hours of engagement followed by short gaps used for repair and repositioning, then more engagement. The wave did not rest. It did not change tactics because it did not seem to have tactics in the way that military planners understood the word. It simply pushed, and everything it touched broke or moved aside. Do-hyun's fleet did not break. It bent. It gave ground when giving ground was useful and held when holding was necessary, and the difference between those 2 moments was something only Do-hyun seemed to know in advance. Kangmin worked without stopping for 30 hours, rerouting power through systems that were not designed to carry it. fixing things that had no remaining spare parts by making the other broken things fit together in ways that were probably not safe and definitely worked. He talked constantly while he worked, to himself, to the ship, to anyone nearby, and no one told him to stop because the talking seemed to be part of how he thought. Taiho's team handled 9 separate hull breaches over the 3 days. A hull breach during active combat was the kind of problem that ended ships. Taiho's team treated each one the way a person might treat a leak in a roof during a rainstorm, something annoying that needed to be fixed so you could get back to everything else. After the 4th breach, one of his crew asked how he stayed calm. Taiho thought about it and said he wasn't sure he was calm exactly. He was just busy. On the 2nd day, a council commander from the Oran fleet opened a private channel to Do-hyun. His voice was strained. He asked how Do-hyun was deciding when to fall back, because his own models showed that the human fleet should have collapsed 6 hours ago. Do-hyun said, "We fall back when falling back helps." The Oran commander asked what that meant. Do-hyun said, "It means the question is never whether to stop, only when stopping is useful." He paused. "Right now it isn't. Hold your position and do not fire unless I say." He closed the channel. The Oran commander held his position. On the 3rd day, the Thryn fleet arrived. Dorak commanded it personally. He had pushed the ships hard to get there and had not told the council he was coming. He did not know what he expected to find. He expected a broken human fleet, probably. He expected to be arriving to clean up a disaster and take charge of what remained. Instead, he found the human ships battered but moving, still in formation, still fighting, still coordinating as if this were day one, and they were doing something that stopped him completely. Half the fleet was pushing forward into the wave. The other half was moving in the opposite direction, covering the retreat of Council civilian vessels that had been trapped on the wrong side of the engagement when the wave arrived. They were going in 2 directions at once, fighting and protecting simultaneously, and both things were working. Dorak looked at his tactical display for a long time. He looked at the gap in Do-hyun's formation, a space on the left flank, not large, but shaped in a way that matched the standard deployment spread of a Thryn assault group exactly. He stared at it. It had been there, according to the sensor logs, for 11 hours. He gave a quiet order. His fleet moved into the gap. No communication with Do-hyun, no coordination request. He simply fit his ships into the space that had been waiting for them. Within 20 minutes, the left flank was locked. Yuna had not slept in 2 days. She was working at a data terminal on the flagship, running analysis on everything the sensors had collected about the wave, how it moved, what it responded to, what made it pause, even briefly. There was something. She could feel it in the data before she could see it clearly. A pattern in the hesitation, small moments where the wave slowed slightly, a fraction of a second. Inconsistent in time, but consistent in what caused it. She cross-referenced the signal frequencies. She pulled up old contact records from the early human starflight era. Then she found it. The wave responded to a specific signal, a distress call format used by a species extinct for 300 years. A species called the Orhen, who had lived near this region of space, who had been gone long before the Council formed. The signal format had been recorded by a human exploration crew 300 years ago because the crew had encountered an Orhen automated beacon still running on a dead world and had logged it carefully and filed it in the archive and forgotten about it. Humanity had it. No other species would ever have thought to look for it. She ran to Kangmin. She did not explain. She just handed him the file and said, "Broadcast this on every available frequency right now." Kangmin looked at the file and then at her face, and then plugged it in and hit the broadcast control without asking a single question. The signal went out across the entire engagement zone. The wave stopped, not retreated, stopped. Every entity in it went still at the same moment, like something had hit pause. The silence on the bridge was complete. No one moved. Do-hyun looked at the sensor readout and then at Yuna. She said, "Now." He said, "All ships advance. Full formation. Now." The wave broke, not destroyed. It was not clear if it could be destroyed or if destroying it was even the right word for what would happen, but it fragmented and pulled back, moving away from the signal, moving away from the human fleet and the Thryn ships alongside it, moving back through the veil and continuing to move until the sensors could no longer track it. The battle was over. The silence after was the kind that takes a long time for people to believe in. Eventually, Counselor Veth's voice came over the channel. It was quieter than usual. "We owe you an explanation," he said, "and humanity is owed a great deal more than a junior seat." Later, in the temporary command station, Boyoung found Dorak standing at a viewport. He looked different, not smaller, but less certain of his own certainty. He asked her how the human fleet had held when everything suggested it should have broken. She thought about the archive, the Veth Ori record, Yuna's face in the dark station, Taiho fixing hull breaches with the calm of someone doing home repairs, Kangmin talking to a broken ship until it worked. She said, "We don't have a ceiling." Dorak was quiet. "That terrifies me," he said. "I know," she said. "That is why you have to stop being afraid of us and start talking to us, because what was beyond that veil, it has a ceiling too, and it is much higher than yours." On the bridge, later when the fleet was moving back toward council space and the stars were bright and close, Taiho came to stand beside Do-hyun. He asked what happened next. Do-hyun said he didn't know. Taiho said that was insane. Do-hyun smiled, a small thing, barely visible. He told Taiho to sleep. They would figure it out in the morning. They always did.